Okay, well, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. Matt Hibner, like you said, with Garmann Miller, principal. We're an architectural and engineering firm in Minster. We have locations in Dublin as well and Indianapolis. We've been working with the district since 2017 and had a lot of just great opportunities to look at facilities and assess and master plan. Which brings us to kind of tonight. We're really, kind of going through more of a historical analysis of where we've been up to date. And with me is Monica Bruel. Monica joined Garmann Miller 3 years ago. She used to work on the master planning side of things with Regency Construction, worked on how many different districts in the state of Ohio in terms of putting together master plans. So yeah, 200, it's pretty extensive, that experience that she brings. So with that, we're just going to kind of jump into the presentation. And I should point out, Kurt South and Doug Rentz, they've been a part of the process with us as well. Kurt's a registered architect with 30 plus years experience. And Doug Rentz is our Director of Communications and Marketing. So he helps us put the plan together to really get the information and communication out to the community. So yeah, we kind of have a large plethora of experiences and like to bring that to the table. So tonight's agenda, you can see that over on the right-hand side. We've got just a brief history of where the buildings that are here. We're going to talk about the state funding and what those options were at the time. We're then going to dive into master planning, educational visioning, the design process, and then the bond campaign. What we went through back in 2020, and then really just next steps from here. So, apologize if my voice is, there you go. Got a little bit of a sore throat, but apologize for that. So anyway, let's go here. So yeah, we just went through the next steps, the history, really. We just wanted, this is once again something that we shared a couple years ago, just looking at your overall surrounding adjacent communities and districts. Just the number of projects that had been completed within Seneca County and around Seneca County. You can see a lot of those communities went ahead with new facilities through the co-funded program that OFCC offers. Really, besides Tiffin, Old Fort is really the only one that has not taken that next step with OFCC in the last several years. Some of your existing school locations, you can see, we've got Kraut, we've got, all the different buildings on site. I know it's kind of hard to read there. Middle school, which we're in right now, the high school. So got all those locations, and then, we didn't locate all the administrative buildings, the bus garage, and so forth, but you're certainly within the district limits there. The 6 buildings that we want to kind of focus on tonight, just the history of, are the 4 elementaries, the middle school and the high school. We got Lincoln. That was originally built in 1953, and the one addition that was done was in 1962. So really, kind of what we're trying to show here is there hasn't been a lot of work in several different years, and I think everybody understands the condition of most of these facilities. Same with Washington. It was originally built in 1955. There was one addition 3 years later. And so, at 1958, we're looking at 60 plus years of really no major renovations or additions. We then have Kraut and Noble. So Kraut, original building was built in 1957. There was one addition in 1962. And so we're at that 60-year threshold once again. Noble Elementary, that was an original building back in 1931, and then we had 2 different subsequent additions, one in 1958 and one in 1966. So it seemed like there was a lot of growth in the community, in the district, in the 1950s and 60s, but really beyond that, besides the middle school, which we'll get to here in a minute, not a lot in terms of buildings per se. The middle school, this was part of an OFCC program back in 2003. It fell under the Exceptional Needs Program. Monica's going to touch on that here in the presentation here in a little bit. But this one, like I said, built in 2003, which we're in now. Overall, very good condition. So it's standing the test of time. And then the last building I wanted to highlight is the Columbian High School. That was built in 1960. So kind of sitting right at that 1960 mark, where 60 years ago was the really last major thing done to it. So with that, just kind of wanted to bring a highlight. There's a big buzzword out there right now. It's called 21st century learning. We're doing a lot of these with school districts where it's not so much of how buildings were designed back in the 50s and 60s. The education curriculum has changed substantially. School buildings were built in a time period that educated students very differently than today. And so, how can we respond to that and move forward? And so you see, like, this is an example project where there's a lot of flexible space. There's a lot of opportunity for breakout sessions for students, inclusion, and so forth, allowing, really, you see a lot of it with the furniture and how the furniture is used and how it really creates that ability to change and move things around and really just provide multiple and different opportunities for those students to learn, to help one another grow in their education and so forth. So now I'm going to turn it over to Monica, and she's going to handle the state funding piece.
I got to work the microphone as well, huh? Or the clicker. All right, thanks, Matt. So the Ohio Facilities Construction Commission is it the state agency that provides the funding. They actually provide it for all public construction, but the piece that we want to talk about is for the K-12 piece. There are 609 school districts in the state, and the equity rank, where you fall on this list that the Ohio Department of Education puts out every year, is how they determine when you're going to be offered funding, and then what percentage your state's going to contribute and what percentage your local share is going to contribute. What we have heard recently from some planners at OFCC is that they are through about 2/3 of that list. So they're at about roughly 400 position. Not all of those districts have completed projects. In fact, your district is number 178. And what that means is at that time, there was say, hey, Tiffin, you want to move forward with funding? The answer was no, we're not ready. For a variety of reasons. That's often what school districts do if they have operating or some other things going on. And then they OFCC goes down to the next set of districts and goes through those. And then at about 4 or 5 years ago, they stopped asking districts if they want to move into this funding and get planning because there were so many districts that were in that pipeline. And so they've put a hold on it. There's about 80 districts that they are working with right now in different phases. And so they need to get those through, so, get that glut of districts through before they bring in some new districts for that funding. So what they have said to districts is if you are not working with us now, don't expect a call from us for 10 plus years, is what they have said. And that means your best option to participate in a program with OFCC is through the ELP program, and I'm going to talk about that in just a second. The funded program is what I referenced, is that's where the state contributes their share, and then you would come up with your local share. That's CFAP, Classroom Facilities Assistance Program. The exceptional needs is what middle school was built under back in 2003 when it opened, and that's when a building was significantly deemed that it needed to be replaced with new construction, and then a design, and the state contributed money with that program. Expedite a local partnership is where you identify a full master plan for the district, and you say, you know what, we're going to do a piece of that. Now, you could do the whole thing, but you have to pay for all of this up front with local funds. And so districts often say, you know what, we can't afford this huge amount, but we can afford a new elementary school, a new high school, a wing to a building. It's usually a new construction. It's not always, renovation is not always the best, but then you pay for it with local funds, and then you earn a credit towards your local share at the time that you get into the funded program. So those are the three main programs. The way OFCC, part of the process is they look at the buildings and they do an assessment, and they walk through the facilities. They have a team of consultants come through and they identify areas that need to be renovated or replaced. They have they look at heating and roof and walls and furniture and plumbing and all the different systems and come up with a cost to either renovate or to replace. So that's the building piece. Then they look at the enrollment piece. They do a 10-year projection. And if the enrollment is increasing at the 10th year, then the projection that they use for the master plan is that 10th year. But if it's going down, they use the 5th year in the master plan, so that, understanding there's a year of design and a couple of years of construction. They want to give some wiggle room so that you're not building something that's to be so small that down the road. So the other piece of the master plan is really looking at any reprogramming, any kind of spaces that need to be repurposed or walls that need to be pushed out to make a little bit larger, and then that other space then becomes some other use for it. So there is some budgeted dollars in the master plan if you need additional restrooms or making the kitchen larger or things like that for the population. Those three components go into what's called the master plan that OFCC puts together. When you are looking at building assessments and the cost and things like that, there's a guideline called the 2/3 guideline, and it is if the cost to renovate is greater than 2/3 the cost to replace with new construction, the recommendation would be to build new construction. So that, again, down the road, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, you're not going to be, they want to make sure the investment is going to last. And so that's that 2/3 piece. There are also a 1/3 guideline, so the middle school would fall under that, that is less than 1/3, so just then 1/3 the cost to renovate than to replace. You don't necessarily need to do everything that's identified. Obviously technology is usually the biggest thing that goes into it, but if things meet code, then you don't need to paint the walls, and you don't need to do some of the smaller things that are working for you. You have the ability to pick and choose. We had a team of, so OFCC sends people, but I believe that we had folks from Garmann Miller come out and look. I think there's a picture of you guys there, looking at some of the elementary schools. And which is often what school districts do, is because they want to have their own architect have another set of eyes, because these assessments were done several years ago to make sure that your budget is going to withstand if there needs to be any renovation. And so some of the building deficiencies identified were the safety and security at all of the buildings, the infrastructure, so the systems, and the HVAC, as plumbing, electrical, things like that, and maybe other, maybe there's some structural issues as well in some places. So we did have a group come through, and for your buildings, if you can guess this, all of your buildings exceed that 2/3, the guideline. And I have the percentage there as well. These are costs from 2019. I didn't go through the math to do any kind of inflationary updates, but in 2020, the construction cost set by OFCC went up 11%. That usually comes out in April, but because of COVID and quarantining and all that and everything that was going on in 2020, they did not do an update until December, and costs went up 11%. And then in April 2021, they went up again 5%. So we're in April again, and there will be a cost update. I've not heard the percentage I did hear the other piece is that they are going to include inflation on the construction numbers, but also the renovation numbers. And so, whereas in the past, that construction piece was always going up, 11%, 5%, whatever. And then the renovation budget was only going up, but they saw some of those numbers. So steel would go up, or windows or whatever would kind of go up. Not a lot of stuff was going up as much. But if they're going to add inflation to the cost of construction, they're adding that same inflationary piece to renovation. And so, on another project, I was told, if your buildings, I had buildings there at 67%, they said they're definitely going to be over 2/3. And so you are over 2/3 now, you're going to still be over 2/3 by quite a bit. I show here the historical equity rank position. In 2007, it was your percentage was flipped. You were at a 62% local share. You're in blue here, and OFCC was would pay 38%. Over the years, your percentage has gone down, and OFCC's percentage has gone up. So this year, I show 2021, 29% for Tiffin and 71% for OFCC. This, can be looked at as a good thing because you would be getting more money from the state, but it does take into account. It is an average, and it's about valuation and lots of different science and math and magic goes into that number that's beyond me. So you look at it as a whole. But in looking at the share from OFCC, it's always nice to get more money from the state. And again, for those that like a different kind of graph, you're the green line going down, and the state is red going up there. So when we talk about master planning, we get a lot of people involved, and typically we see a lot of different committees that can form to get different input. And typically at the district level, you have the superintendent, you have a maybe treasurer, maybe a board member or two at that executive level who really are making those global decisions. They know everything about the district. They are responsible for all. From there, the steering committee brings in some more folks. Could be a strategic planning committee. Could be something a little bit more, some more people maybe from the curriculum. Oftentimes we have different facility task force where you bring in some more people from the community that are focused on something specific, possibly athletics or some kind of passion that people have. And then the community focus groups. It could be just a community couple sessions that would be held where you're getting input and providing feedback to the different other teams as they make the decision. So it can be fluid and flexible to fit the needs of the district, but we often see that there are some layers involved in the process. Back in May of 2017 around that time is when we started working with your district. We had variety of team members, I think, over the course of the years in different planning groups. This is a picture from, one session that was held, but we had lots of those, and I know I was a part of some back at the board office, going through, working on things. And that task force looked at enrollment, looked at the grade configuration, the needs, whether you're going to renovate or look at new construction. The program of requirements is certainly part of something that needs to take place, and that's really identifying what kinds of classes or not so much academics, but what's going to be inside the building. So the master plan gives you a square footage number of 100,000 square feet, and here's a box. But then you start breaking it up into, okay, well, we need this much for gym, we need this much for special ed, we need this much for academics, this much for music, and so it starts going down all of those specialties and dividing up the program, as well as looking at the site review, selection, acquisition, things like that. And I'm going to have Matt talk about this, but before I do that, as Matt alluded, I was working on the master plan for your district years ago, and And I know that there was a lot of different options. I was looking through this file of lots of papers, and I was like, oh, I did this when I was at Regency. I'd put this little chart together and send it off to Garmann Miller, and they looked, whatever. But I know that there were a lot of different options, but the best one for your district came because of the excess space that is in this middle school. It would hurt you if you did not use it. So OFCC also has that square foot per student formula that you need to have so much students fit into this 100,000 square foot box, and if you don't have enough students, then what do you do with that space? Well, in their eyes, you can just put more students in there and fill up the space, and so if you don't, then your elementary school was shrinking in size. And so we really worked with the planner to say, how can we get the district more new space, which is more expensive than renovation? How can we get more new space to the district? And this was one of the solutions that we came up with. So.
Yeah, great. I'm going to grab that here. Yeah, so where we went from there is really looking at a two-phase process through the ELP program. This was what we had on the bond issue right during COVID and so forth, but you kind of see just the numbers there that with that PK6 building, what was going to transpire as part of that phase one, which I'll just kind of point to right here. So yeah, the new PK6 building at the time was planned to be completed in 2023, so next year was the initial plan based on the timing that we were looking at back then. And then phase two was really contingent upon that OFCC funding through the CFAP program. And that's where that would involve a new 9 through 12 high school addition to this existing middle school building. So we'd get the 7 through 8 grade levels to remain and then bring the entire 9 through 12 down here. And again, as Monica mentioned, series of different options that were reviewed and evaluated with the stakeholders of the district to really make sure that we were selecting the best option for the district that maximized the co-funding. And that also included the partial demolition of the existing high school building. I should point out the phase one included the demolition, potential demolition of the existing elementary buildings as well. So, some other items that we looked at, and I know there's, just some clarity requested behind, like the school site, the elementary site that was selected for consideration and down at the south end of the site. But there were actually several different sites within the district that were evaluated at various different levels. We looked at availability of utilities, transportation to and from, also available acreage. One thing that OFCC looks at on their projects is the available amount of available land that they can place a building. And so we have to be conscious of what really requirements are out there that are feasible, to do. We also even did as much as soil borings on some of these sites just to make sure that they were actually buildable sites. The soil conditions below were not going to be a detriment to the overall budget and program. As I mentioned, just the OFCC recommendation of a minimum of 39 acres for that PK6 site. So how many different locations within the district, within proximity of really the city, would be advantageous. And so ultimately, the ones in red were not selected. They had different factors that just kind of led to their, moving on from those. But the one kind of highlighted in blue was ultimately what was selected. And then what you see in green is the site that we're on right now. The selected elementary building site at the time was down here just south of town. Available utilities, the proximity to the high school and middle school sites were ideal. The acreage, 82 acres, was phenomenal to have accessible. There were some residential districts or residential neighborhoods that were very close, still had access to the main roads there, multiple points of potential entry, and then just feasible soil conditions. And really, it was a great financial acquisition at the time. I know that was something that was, debated. I think, if I remember right, the site here at the middle school, 3.1 million, back in 2003. So, there was a lot of acquisition that had to occur to make this site happen. So, comparatively, it was a great win. So then what we did, we just developed some preliminary concepts, and I know this isn't coming in that great on this particular screen, but we wanted to look at how that site could potentially operate. And so, this is something that was very conceptual. This was, going to happen, again, just to show an example, but there's so much design that has to happen even beyond just this, of meeting with the transportation folks, meeting with the administration, meeting with the staff, and really community on making sure that we're getting all those needs and desires met. And so, but what we did here is we just showed how it could potentially sit on that site, how the access points would work, how we could, potentially, have some tree lines that would buffer the residential community to the north, and so forth. And then this just shows a little bit more, clarity of what the different areas were. One of the things we always look at in K through 12 education is just separating, the bus drop-off from the parent drop-off. That's a, important safety element that we need to account for. So really diverting those two entities separately and accessing the site as cleanly as possible are very important. We want to have a nice, clean drop-off, plenty of room for those parents that do pick up their child to safely enter and exit the facility. And then just looking at how the grades would potentially or could potentially be laid out from a building standpoint. So, as I mentioned earlier, phase 2, that's kind of what we're now, focusing on, from this discussion. Again, this is where we were at back in 2020, looking at a new 9 through 12 building to this existing middle school, and then the partial demolition of the existing high school building. This is just a graphic aerial of how that could potentially work. You see the middle school point here, right through here. We are looking at an addition to kind of go in that open space to the north of the site, and then parking and new entry right in here. Felt like this could be a very plausible option, but again, that would be vetted out through, multiple meetings with stakeholders moving ahead. And this is just another enlarged site plan of that particular 9 through 12 addition. And then with the remaining phase 2 is the existing high school building site, partial demolition of the academic wing and auditorium of the academic wing, and then the auditorium and gymnasium were set to remain. So kind of this black area right here is the academic wing that would be partially removed, with keeping a good portion of the building over here on the east side of the site. Some of the priorities that were discussed, through those task force meetings and committee meetings was really just the high level of safety and security that were important. We implement these strategies all the time in new schools with active shooter and all the challenges that we see around the nation. Safety and security are so important to really just making sure our children are safe, when they're at school, when they can focus on what they need to do there, and they need to be educated. So they don't need to be concerned of their safety and so forth. So the more we can focus on that and provide a building that gives them that is all the better. So, and then minimizing disruption of students and staff during construction. That's something that was once again a district priority through the various discussions that we had. And then really, third one that kind of rose to the top was the design of buildings based on grade configuration with adequate separation. So, if we're talking a PK6 building, we want to make sure that, the preschoolers are getting a different delivery than a sixth grader, and no different even at the, phase 2 piece where you've got middle school and high school together. A 12 and 13-year-old child needs to be segregated from an 18-year-old student, that, just inherently they're at different levels of their development and education and so forth. There can be overlap for sure, but minimizing that as much as we could. And then, kind of the next piece we talked about was educational visioning. As I kind of briefly mentioned before, just how buildings are changing based on how kids are learning, how they're being taught with the different curriculums. So like back to the 21st century ideas, high performance learning environments, just being able to support the students, really looking at how spaces can be used in multiple different configurations, the flexibility, the multi-purpose, multi-use space, and really inspiring and encouraging that critical thinking and design thinking that prepares students for what's next in their careers. So this is certainly something that we're in the midst of with all the districts that we work with. So a very important element to really extrapolate how the curriculum affects the building. And we need to make sure that we're providing a building that responds to that curriculum very, very well. And so, this is just a few examples of, some of the things that we look at, supporting all students in an inclusive environment, how the support spaces, furniture, spatial sequencing, and outdoor spaces affect all of that, and down to the acoustics, lighting, color. We're very sensitive to that, especially, even in the special needs programs. That's a very important element. We're dealing with that. We got sensory rooms where that lighting is key, to the being able to change that and respond to the different students. So that's just another example. And then, just kind of how the design process happens. The pictures that I showed you early, with the different site options, those are very schematic. They're very preliminary. But this design process is an evolution. It takes, on something like this, we'd be working on the design for a year. Going through it. We want to meet with all your staff. We want to meet with the community at various times, the Board of Education, the administration, and even the students. We really benefit from understanding what the students' needs are, and accounting for them as much as we can through that process. And this is just kind of shows you, a building that we use something called Building Information Modeling. It's BIM, as the acronyms is. And this is a school building that, we've designed everything 3D in the computer that we can then share and communicate the design with. Down to the signage, you can see everything in the building. And so versus the old school days of bringing blueprints and rolling them out in 2D drawings, we'll throw on the VR and, really be able to show you how the building works, functions, operates, just be able to truly understand that. So, and then this is just kind of an example. This is an exterior of a building that we did, and just the realization that you see. This is a model or a rendering of it, and then how it actually came out from a very similar angle. You can see just all the details are translated through to the actual building itself. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Monica, and she's going to go through the bond campaign.
Right. So before you get to the building, we have to assist, or you have to be able to have the money for it. And so one of the things that we can help do is help with the plan, and that's really looking at the goals of the project, or the goals of your campaigning. Looking at the audience, we have a gentleman on our staff called Wes Farno, who is working on what I think a state senator's campaign now. But he has assisted us on some other projects, and he's looks at your voter information and really to identify who's voting, when they're voting, when's the best time for you to go out, what's your history been, what kind of precincts, what kind of message, when do you put your signs out, when do you send your postcards. That whole piece, it's more than I would think goes into it, but it's a very scientific and strategic way to look at this. So from understanding your budget and timeline and how you're going to do that. So that's a big piece of that piece, as well as really understanding and giving information out to your community. I know you've done a survey recently, but we've assisted in community surveys. We have small group sessions where we get feedback from different community members, have these exit tickets where, if they're not comfortable asking a question in a large setting, they can put their question on paper or on the card, and we collect them and get back to them later. And then this picture on the right is doing some polling of what people are preferring when it comes to some different options. So there's all kinds of different methods and ways that we get the community involved. And our staff, Matt mentioned Doug Rentz. He is on our communications and marketing director, and so his staff is able to put together door hangers and graphics and all this collateral. And this was for Salina City Schools that passed, I guess, last May. But we're able to assist in that piece as well to help support the district. You can close it up. Sorry, I messed that up.
Yeah, so with that, that kind of concludes the history of where we've been, and really just want to kind of open it up to any questions or comments from anybody in terms of, what maybe the information that we covered tonight, or, just questions in general about how we can help take the next step.
So you'll have a really in-depth history of where we've been, of the needs of our community and our district. So y'all have a very in-depth understanding of the needs of our community and the needs of our district. Y'all have been integral through all of these pieces. I'm wondering, so this is really looking at if we're starting a school campaign or if we're looking to build a new school, have y'all done pieces of looking at what's existing, the state of those, and helping to put together a plan on how to address things, how to lay out possibly a phased plan so that we can have maybe a multi-year plan of how to address what we have and what the needs are?
Yes, absolutely. So part of that, what we kind of showed at the beginning was a little bit of that assessment, of looking at some of the existing buildings and infrastructure. But I think it's maybe pivoting from that and just getting more of, the short, middle, and long-term, plan of execution to maintain what you got, but also to plan for the future.
What would a timeline for a plan like that look like?
Certainly we've got the experience of knowing some of the existing buildings, so we can kind of build upon that. But I would say, that's something that we can do over the next, course of 5 to 6 months between, really digging deep and then providing plans of, kind of moving ahead of what you would need, working with, Scott and others in the district to help prioritize those needs as well. And we would start right away. We have the ability to start right away, but I think getting that systematic plan together would take a series of months, kind of going back and forth and understanding, the priorities and so forth.
And that's what y'all have done before with districts, of putting together a master plan of taking care of what you have and then where do the next builds go? Because there's a number of decisions we need to make that have kind of been on hold while we look for plans. So we kind of need to have that short-term and long-term thing and let Scott and his team start addressing those pieces that need done while we kind of also don't get in the way of what some of those long-term plans
Absolutely.
are.
Yep.
What groups do you usually have work with you on those plans?
Typically, it's, a task force, of folks. I mean, various administrators, operations for sure, potentially a board member or two. So kind of back to that original slide that Monica covered, I mean, it's probably a group of, anywhere from 15 to 20 people potentially that help with that feedback. Community representative or two would always be a good sounding board as well. So.
Those are all my questions.
So Matt, back to the state funding, actually, Monica. We're only eligible basically for the ELP program right now?
You are eligible.
I'm going to get us back here.
You are eligible to apply for ELP. Now, you had applied before, you were unsuccessful. It kind of, the window, it kind of closes but doesn't lock so that you can apply again. What happens is your master plan would be updated again with the enrollment piece and the cost set piece. So that's going to show your buildings are well over the 2/3 still. OFCC is not going to put any more money in to come in to confirm that information. But yes, so then they would say, okay, so your master plan before was a new K6 or K5, and that's really going to be updating that. And when do you want to go out to the ballot? That's what they're going to want to know. When are you going to go to the voters for your piece?
So the exceptional needs program doesn't exist for us right now?
The exceptional needs program, what that would be is they would come in and look at, there's a window of, an application window every year, and you would apply for it and say, our building, Kraut, is so bad, we can't have our kids there, whatever. Assessors come out, different people from the state, they look at it, go through their little checklist, and then they look at all of the other school districts that applied in that same way, and then decide, okay, this district or this school is the worst, this one is going to get the money. And so then they would do a plan, and it would not be, it would be a building to replace would be a building to replace Kraut. I'm using that as an example. But it wouldn't be just that for that size. It would take care of that whole grade population. So that would take care of your whole K5 population. And, I don't really know. I thought that was the fall. I'd have to look and see the guidelines of when that comes out. But, I asked them who their planner was, because your planner from OFCC has retired. And so they have not reassigned anybody. And so what they said to me was, if they're interested, have them reapply. We'll assign a planner. We'll get them, get their master plan updated and start with that process. There's no cost to the district to have that done. I would certainly recommend that. It does take board action, but they don't hold you to it. If you say we're going to go out in November of this year and you don't, it's not a big deal.
So the reality is, in order to do any kind of construction, we need the state funds and we need the levy passed. Is that true?
Yes. Well, no. You can do a project without OFCC, but that's all on you then.
Right.
Maybe two separate fundings. So one would be operations. Well, one would be for our general fund operations where we're headed into deficit spending, and the other would be facilities. There'd be two separate campaigns.
So the levy, if you go with the levy, that would be operating, and then the state funding would be construction.
Which would be two separate things we'd be asking them to be asking the public to add.
You want to know, we're talking about priorities. What is one of the biggest things that, facilities-wise, that you would see? Or maybe it's not a facilities thing.
So first and foremost, the pieces that are first and foremost, we have our general budget and our operating budget, and ensuring that we are mindful and working towards not being in deficit spending. And then as it comes to facilities, I'm always going to look at Scott, as that's his role. But we have a couple of decisions that are really like paused. And one of those includes the tennis courts. They have to be addressed at this point. If not addressed, there could not be the ability to play on them next season. But we don't know where to put them because we don't know what the long-term plans are. The auditorium has to be addressed. I think that's up there on the list. What else is up there on the list? I'm going to look at you because I'm not going to speak.
Just the high school roof needs addressed, which I think I am addressing this summer. This building has some issues to address, this wall here. When we go to replace that, and are we expanding, or are we just replacing what we have? Big decisions like this. Floors here, the high school gym, bleachers definitely should be replaced within the next couple of years because of age. And Noble's in 1931. Correct, yes. I mean, we did repair the roof last year because the levee failed, and we put a new boiler in, so we're working on that process in that building.
And you built a 3 or 5 year?
3-year plan.
You built a 3-year plan of like what's critical and what can be
Correct.
done.
Needs.
But we need that full plan of where things are going to go and yeah. So we need the full plan because we can't keep piecemealing things. We can't say, well, we're going to put this here, because if that then takes us out of being able to build or do something else there, we need to know which areas are dog-eared for things, which areas we can address, and what are critical needs. But we're to a point where we're past a point of making these decisions, and it's hard to make them without a plan.
And what makes it even more challenging is, I know, for example, like when we looked at replacing all these windows and the talk about a potential addition to really make this a more functional space, it was counterintuitive to the phase 2 plan of, actually adding square footage on, because they would then have to be taken off with the 9 through 12 coming on. So it's like this, we're kind of in this holding position, back and forth. So.
I think you covered a lot of what we've been talking about lately.
It's just hard. We've been talking about it, but we haven't been able to make it.
There's a lot that I think they're contemplating on this area, this ground area, or has been discussed at some points, and I think it is just that placing. Where do you place a tennis court? Do you keep it over there? Do you bring it here?
We've seen so many drawings of things in this land,
Yeah. And at one time, we did a new 9 through 12 building up on the
hill.
On the hill. So, we'd looked at options for that as well.
So what would be a reasonable first next step to kind of get the process moving here? We're in transition in terms of leadership right now. We're at the end of the school year. We have the summer coming up where, projects and planning need to happen for next year. Where do we start? Do we get a task force assembled? Do we look at doing some survey work to try to get some feedback, some information? We need to generate some momentum towards getting, the ball rolling here. To set, I think it would be helpful to kind of have some momentum going into the next school year, so that the new superintendent could come in with a little bit of momentum, with strategic planning, facilities planning, a little direction to go in. So what would you recommend those first next steps would be for the district?
Yeah, I think setting up that task force is step number 1. Step number 2 is really looking at those critical milestone issues, the near term that, we know even if, let's just say next year, you're talking about a building campaign, Now you're a year after that for design, and now you're 2 years after that for construction. So we're easily at 4 and 5 years, long-term fix. So we got to get that immediate window of need addressed, and as best we can. So I think working with Scott and his group, really diving into those, but then also looking at that greater picture of, where the rest of the facilities need to go long-term. Anything else you want to add?
Well, unless there's any other questions, I want to thank Matt and Monica for being here tonight. Appreciate the presentation. Again, we will make this available to our committee and community, and we certainly want to continue this conversation. I think we're getting the conversation started, but as Dr. McBride said, we really are looking for some movement and some direction so that the district can address some of their critical needs and really get a vision for what the future of Tiffin City Schools wants to look like in terms of facilities. So thank you for being here tonight.
Thanks for having us.
Very much appreciate your presentation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.